So I am pleased to say that Roberta H. Hunter is here to present today on environmental literacy. She's a faculty member with Rutgers in the Department of 4-H Youth Development. She has been a county agent in Monmouth County, New Jersey for a year and a half. And before joining 4-H, Ms. Hunter had nearly 20 years of experience as a science and environmental educator. She began work as a water quality educator, working with urban Philadelphia youth in the Schuylkill.
You can tell you're not from Philly.
I'm not a local. In the Schuylkill Center for Environmental Education before moving on to nonprofits such as the National Aquarium in Baltimore and the Stony Brook Millstone Watershed Association in Pennington, New Jersey. Ms. Hunter then began a successful science and environmental education consultancy in 2004 when she provided curriculum development, professional development, and instruction to elementary schools with a focus on student-directed science research in grades K through 5. Ms. Hunter holds a MS in environmental education from Southern Oregon University and is currently enrolled in the Learning Sciences Program, PAP program, right here at the GSE. Her research interests focus on the development of environmental literacy, specifically decision-making competencies in informal and formal educators, and whether that impacts the environmental literacy of youth with whom they work. Current research projects include how informal science educators understand learning and the use of problem-based learning to develop environmental literacy in formal and informal educators. And we are also very pleased to see this talk, which she'll be giving next week.
Next week, yeah, at North American Association for Environmental Education in San Diego.
So let's give a very warm welcome to Roberta.
Thank you very much. Before I start, I wanted to know, I'm taking the sign with me, how many of you are familiar with the Penn East Pipeline? Does it sound familiar to anybody? Right, a few. So it's a proposed pipeline that would run from Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, carry liquefied natural gas to a pipeline in Hopewell, Pennsylvania. It will cross approximately 16 rivers or streams, cut through some pristine wildlife habitat, and these are just some of the criticisms from opponents. Proponents of the pipeline say we're going to pump $1.6 billion into New Jersey's economy, we're going to supply over 400 jobs, and provide affordable home heating and energy to residents of New Jersey and beyond. So we have two very different views of this pipeline. What would I need as a citizen to be able to make a decision on that? What are some things that you think I might need? Carol?
Information about what the impact would be.
Okay, so information about the impact. What else?
Preferences, which do I want?
Yeah, I have to have a stand to begin with. Do I think this is a good idea or not? Anything else?
Whether it's going into my yard.
Yeah, whether it's in my backyard, because nobody wants it in their backyard. Right, so I need both a stance to come from, I need some background information, I need the impact on my life. So these are some of the components that we'll be talking about today. That works. When we talk about environmental literacy, both knowledge of ecological systems and other systems, my attitudes about the issue, beliefs about the environment, skills, and ultimately behavior. And that inclusion of behavior is one of the ways that environmental literacy may differ from other types of literacy, in that it involves an action. Something that we are doing at the end of the day to change the environment or to change, depending on how young you are, the world. So today we're going to talk about what environmental literacy is and how it's changed a little bit over time. How has it been assessed before now? And what are we missing from the information from those assessments? What should we be looking at? So where should we go from here? So why are we interested in environmental literacy? Well, it's seen as the endpoint of environmental education. So first we need to understand what environmental education is. The phrase was first used by William Stapp in 1969 in the middle of the environmental movement of the late 60s and early 70s, to describe an education that helps us sustain the earth, that helps us take into consideration the environmental systems of which we're a part. About 8 years later, the United Nations Environmental Science and Cultural Organization hosted the first intergovernmental, international conference on environmental education. And this is what's known as the Tbilisi Declaration. This is the goal of environmental education. So to have a world citizenry that's aware of and concerned about the environment, its associated problems, and that has the knowledge, the skills, the motivations, and the commitment to work both individually and collectively towards solutions of current problems and the prevention of new ones. We know we're good at making new problems. And you can see in there what will become the backbone of environmental education: awareness, knowledge, concern, skills, and behavior. So if we look at environmental education, whether it's in a formal setting or an informal setting, we'll see these threads running through in various combinations. And we'll see those threads running through our discussion today. So why are we concerned about it now? In the early 2000s, we had a renewed interest in environmental literacy that spurred an interest in how do we assess environmental literacy. So in 2004, Richard Louv published a book called The Last Child in the Woods. Has anybody read that? Great book, great book. And it spurred a grassroots movement called No Child Left Inside. And that looked different in different ways. And the goal of the No Child Left Inside movement was to amend the Elementary and Secondary Education Act so that it required inclusion of environmental education, outdoor education, increased physical education, and environmental literacy upon graduation. So what happened, it still hasn't passed. It's been introduced. It's made progress, a little more progress each time it's been introduced, but it hasn't passed yet. But what it did is it sparked the development of environmental literacy plans at the state level. So the amendment had the language that you would not receive any funding for environmental education, increased physical education, all of that, unless you had a plan to prove that your graduating seniors were environmentally literate. So all but 4 states have environmental literacy plans in progress. 13 have actually adopted and implemented them and have graduation requirements for environmental literacy. The closest one that has adopted it, closest geographically, is Maryland. They had some really good groundwork already done before this push began. But you can see how if we have 50 different states with 50 different environmental literacy plans, and we have 50 different assessments, and they're all based on somebody's idea of what environmental literacy is, then it's not really, it's going to be hard to compare. It's going to be apples and oranges and kumquats and everything else. So there was a push to develop a more cohesive framework for environmental literacy. And Hallweg and colleagues published that in late 2011. They worked with the top researchers, environmental-led researchers in the US, as well as some representatives from PISA, to look at how do we really assess this construct? How do we assess environmental literacy? So they begin with this definition, which is the definition that I use. I'll give you a moment to read it. I think it's our best definition so far because it gives a pretty clear idea of the components of environmental literacy, so it makes it measurable. It discusses, it discusses degrees of environmental literacy, which hasn't really been brought up too often. And it's a pretty well constructed framework. And this is the framework that they developed. It's sort of a visual of the components of environmental literacy that could be assessed. So You can see it looks something like that earlier graphic we had with knowledge and attitudes and behaviors. Shuffled that to bring it to knowledge, dispositions, and competencies that occur in different contexts to result in environmentally responsible behavior. So their definition of knowledge is a bit broader than most of the earlier ones that we'll be looking at in a minute. It includes physical and ecological systems, but it also includes social, cultural, and political systems, knowledge of civic action possibilities, action strategies, and the existence of multiple solutions to environmental issues. Dispositions rolls together the beliefs and attitudes and affect, and includes environmental sensitivity, attention and concern towards the environment, an assumption of personal responsibility, as well as the view of the locus of control and self-efficacy on issues. So it goes beyond just thoughts about the environment and takes on some of those traits of how effective can I be in a situation. The competencies, which is what I'm interested here, are a lot of those skills for addressing environmental issues, including identifying what is an environmental issue, making an action, analyzing the issue itself, including multiple stakeholders, looking at primary and secondary sources to analyze an issue, looking at multiple stakeholders and making personal judgments on what should be done about an issue, as well as action planning at the individual and collective and governmental levels. So it's a lot more complex than the skills that we'll see in a few moments in the history. And the contexts vary in the level of participation. Am I deciding on a personal action? Am I deciding on a collective action? Am I deciding on what the best action is here in an affluent part of the world or in a third world country? All kinds of different things to take into consideration that will very much affect what is the correct choice. And environmentally responsible behavior, again, on those multiple levels, and we want to look at both habitual environmental behavior, always recycling, always turning off the tap while you're brushing your teeth, things like that, as well as intentional, conscious environmental behavior. So, but it didn't always look like this. I want to look at how it's evolved over time a little bit and what the priorities have been. So in 1981, Hungerford, Payton, and Wilkie, you can see very clearly those environmental education strands: knowledge, awareness, skills, and behavior in theirs. They are very much one of the early research teams in environmental ed. UNESCO in 1990 followed up. They'd had several intergovernmental conferences between the original statement and this, but followed up with that basic functional education for all. Again, we see the emphasis, as we would expect from UNESCO, that it needs to be global and all-encompassing, and provides them with the knowledge, skills, and motives to cope with environmental needs and contribute to sustainable development. Roth puts a new emphasis on skills in his identifying and interpreting and perceiving the relative health of an environmental system and taking action based on that. And then Simmons, we start to see something that's really much easier to parse for assessment, that has these components: affect, ecological knowledge, sociopolitical knowledge, knowledge of environmental issues, skills, determinants, and then the behavior themselves. And this looks very much like the Hallweg et al. Framework that I use. So a related construct is ecological literacy. And that has been seen describing both societal levels in Capra and Orr, that how do we have a society that works towards a sustainable life that puts the environment and human needs in balance. As well as the individual, Jordan, Singer, Vaughn, and Berkowitz published their framework for ecological literacy that should look sort of familiar. Ecological concepts, scientific habits of mind, and human actions. So they leave out the attitudes and beliefs. So if we take them all together and we compare them, we can see that really we have, here we go. So everybody's concerned about knowledge. All of these frameworks are concerned that they have the knowledge that you need, both ecological and then later the socio-political. Almost everyone is concerned about affects, attitudes, behavior, and then all of these definitions bring in skills, that people need the skills to enact the environmentally responsible behavior. And so we have that important component there. So let's look a little bit at some of the assessments that have already taken place. We have the National Environmental Education Training Foundation and Roper National Environmental Literacy Survey, which was a phone survey of adults in households in the U.S. It took place over 10 years, from 1994 to 2004. And they asked about attitudes, beliefs about the environment, and environmentally responsible behavior, such as energy conservation, water conservation, recycling. We had a very robust study called the National Environmental Literacy Assessment by Macbeth Hungerford and colleagues. And that was of American 6th and 8th grade students, and that attended to their, we'll talk about it in more detail, but their environmental beliefs, attitudes, cognitive skills, and behaviors. Then there were other national environmental literacy projects in Israel, in Turkey, in Korea. Oops, I thought I fixed that. Secondary teachers, Sue and Roth, who also then looked at college students with the same instrument. And there have been quite a few on pre-service teachers, because I think it's a definite, how are we preparing these teachers to develop the environmental literacy of their students? However, the pre-service teacher ones almost exclusively involved attitudes and behavior. There really weren't any skills in there. So I want to look more closely at the National Environmental Literacy Assessment to use it as an example of how we've been looking at environmental literacy. It used the middle school environmental literacy scale. That was their instrument. That was the instrument that was adapted for the Israeli study, the Turkey study, and the Korea study as well. So it's been used in multiple settings. Again, American 6th and 8th graders. I had two components for 2 phases for development, but these were the components that it looked at. And we're going to be looking at the cognitive skills and environmental behavior, but just as a brief description. So ecological foundations was that ecological knowledge. The scale in itself was only about 72 items, which I guess is more than enough for middle schoolers to take in an hour. But ecological foundations had things such as a small bird eats a butterfly that has been eating some nectar from a flower. Then the bird is eaten by a hawk. This is an example of adaptation or coloration or a food web, that type of thing. How you think about the environment had a 5-point scale of very true to false. And it had statements such as, I would be willing to stop buying some products to save animals' lives. and I would not be willing to save energy by using less air conditioning. So it had a series of items like that. I did find it interesting that in the attitudes and the behavior, there was a focus on animals, not using fur, saving animals' lives, building animal homes. So I found that interesting. For the cognitive skills, they were given 3 different scenarios. This is one of them, a question of progress. In essence, there's a farm family that no longer wants to farm. To sell their land to another farmer would be they'd get $50,000. A developer who wants to build a mall will buy it for $1 million. But they have to get approval for this zoning difference from the town that they live in. It's a very familiar scenario in New Jersey. And then the other 2 scenarios were about logging and about hunting. And then after the scenario, they were given 3 different questions. For the scenario that you read, they had to darken the letter of the statement that best identifies the environmental issue. So we're getting at environmental issue identification. Which one of these best fit the issue? There was a second question for this scenario. Action planning. You had to choose 2 of these 8 actions and darken the little circle since they used Scantron. It was a while ago. Which did you think would be the best action? And it varied from, writing your U.S. senators and asking for federal law changes to a letter to the editor campaign to ecoterrorism, which I thought was interesting. They would be sabotaging the construction equipment. Another question on hunting. It was about hunting wolves in the West. The students were asked to identify the values represented, the environmental values represented by statements of different stakeholders. So were they ethnocentric or anthropocentric or ecocentric, economic, that type of thing. Interestingly, of the 3 scenarios they had, only one, the hunting one, had a corollary knowledge question in the ecological foundations. So in ecological foundations, there's a question describing how if you remove all the wolves from a system, there are lots of deer, and then there are no deer. And why did this happen? So those are some of the ways that's really the best assessment that's out there for cognitive skills and for issue identification and those competencies. And in all of the assessments that did use cognitive skills as a measure, that they found that they were low. And in fact, that's how the papers that describe these assessments described environmental literacy, either low, moderate, or high. So very much a blanket statement that you had some level of environmental literacy, but it wasn't descriptive. How was your literacy characterized? There have been a couple efforts to characterize a continuum of environmental literacy. Roth in '92 describes nominal, functional, and operational environmental literacy. So nominal is just becoming aware of environmental issues, just being interested in having a rudimentary understanding of ecological issues, ecological systems. Functional, you become personally invested in a few issues, you have a deeper knowledge of some issues, and then operational is really the perfect environmental citizen. You have a greater depth and breadth of understanding of issues and ecological concepts, and you have a greater depth and breadth of behavior, both habitual and intentional. I think one of the shortfalls of this description of this continuum is this is very hard and very rare to attain, and I would doubt that anybody would be considered truly operational, because environmental issues are so complex. Even the most environmentally invested people I know are really, really comfortable with only a small range of issues. Maybe I just don't know any operational people. I think a better continuum, and he measures it again on knowledge, affect, skills, and behavior. I think a better continuum is from Stables. It's not perfect, it has some issues. Stables really looked to the fields of literacy to understand what, how they view literacy and how they use text, right? How is text used? Just to understand simple facts or to use more critically. And he views the environment as the text. So just having an environmental knowledge of systems, he would consider functional. So the way he describes it is, I should be able to go into a forest here in New Jersey and identify a tree as an oak, but then further identify it as a red oak or a scarlet oak. A cultural literacy, environmental literacy, it understands the cultural roles of those environmental systems, of those environments. So for example, he contrasts the greenwood of England to the redwoods of the United States. They both have cultural meaning, and they both carry a deeper meaning than just a collection of trees. He would include the fact that I can identify the red oak and say, yes, that's our state tree. Yes, it's, you know, associated with Rutgers. All of that as some cultural literacy. And then he gets to critical literacy, which is what I'm interested in, is this grappling with multiple stakeholders around these ecosystems that you've looked at and interpreted and understand have cultural meaning. So looking at the redwoods, for example, and understanding that they were once logged, and those values around that logging, you know, those that opposed the logging, why were they opposing it? Because they're, you know, ancient trees, because it's a very unique system that's adapted to that climate. Those that are for logging, something like that, why are they proponents? The economic benefits, the cultural value of being a logger for generations. So using those stakeholders to really make change in systems that benefit the environment. So when we look at our competencies, are looking at in-depth issues and looking at stakeholders and making personal judgments, we're looking at this cultural and critical area here. So can we develop critical literacy in educators? And does that critical literacy roll over to their students and the youth with whom they work? So if we look at, here, I'll go ahead. So here's our table for what the different definitions included in environmental literacy. And you can see that skills is right down, everybody included it to some extent. But if we look at our major assessments of environmental literacy, you can see that skills is sort of empty, right? Negev et al. From Israel talk about it, but they mention that they assess it, but they don't talk about the results. In an independent paper, it said that the cognitive skills were low. So we get half an X, not a full X. But that it's not really well assessed. We've got knowledge, we've got affect and attitudes, and we've got behavior, but we're missing some cognitive skills and competencies from in there. So what are we missing? What are we missing from these assessments that we've done so far? First of all, we know that there's been that focus on knowledge, affect, attitudes, and behaviors, which gives us sort of this black box effect. How are we using our beliefs and attitudes and knowledge and the contexts that we are in to piece together a decision on environmentally responsible behavior. And in addition, there's this assumption that environmental responsible behavior is constant, that there's a checklist, and if you do it all, you're a great environmental citizen, right? And I would argue that the behaviors are not constant, that the end behaviors are not constant, but what is more constant and what is more transferable would be those competencies, the issue identification and analysis. So if we look at the behaviors that have been included in these assessments, these are the two youth assessments. Negative and colleagues did 6th grade and 12th grade in Israel, and this is the American one. You can see we come down to water conservation, energy conservation, talk to others, communicated with others about problems, read stories about the environment, hunting and fishing, and practice agriculture. All very developmentally appropriate for a 6th or 12th grader, right? We don't have a lot of consumer purchasing power type things. If we look at adult behaviors from Sue and Ralph and then Sue, we get into some of the more consumer-oriented behaviors. They have a 3-page behavior assessment. How many times within the last year have you engaged in this behavior? So you can see they have waste reduction, energy conservation, water conservation, recycling, those big 4 that are always there. But then we get into some consumer behaviors of avoided purchasing products or have switched products based on their environmental behavior of the company. Joining conservation groups, some of the civic aspects of it. Encouraged others, voted, and reported environmental violations. They actually have 6 different types of violations in there. But it's still a pretty constrained list of environmentally responsible behavior. Let me make sure I didn't forget anything there. So what else are we missing? Oh, actually, I want to go back because I did forget something. So we have this constrained list, but new things are always coming out. So these items were developed in the late 1990s. So I would say if there were an assessment today, there would be something about global climate change, that type of thing. But there are always new behaviors because there are always new issues. Remember, we talked about, the prevention of new environmental issues. We have not gotten to that point yet. So we have cases like microbeads, which are small pieces of plastic that are included in facial scrubs and toothpaste that are too small to be filtered in our wastewater treatment. And so they travel up the rivers, they travel to sea, and they've become a major part of the persistent marine debris in the ocean systems. So that was not an issue 10 years ago. That wasn't really identified as an issue 5 years ago, but it's a major, there's been a groundswell of support for antimicrobeads and not allowing them to be included. And so there's a new issue, but how is that captured in these behavioral checklists that are in assessments? We find that those that do look at the competence and cognitive skills do find that they're lacking. And they're primarily quantitative, which is great because we get a big swath. We have, sample sizes of 8,000, 3,000. But we're not necessarily getting a richer view of how things are coming together. How are people making these decisions and getting we have a nice frame of the tapestry of environmental literacy, but we don't necessarily see the colors yet. So, and all of the definitions included the fact that there's individual and collective action. So how does environmental literacy look like, or what does environmental literacy look like in those collective actions? What does it look like in collaborative work? We haven't looked around that. So how do we, this is still the competencies around issue identification. I'm sorry, I went too far. Here we go. Okay. We need to look at the collaborative use of environmental literacy. How are we making groups group decisions? How are we deciding to act based on the people that we're working with? And is that transferable? We want to look where to go from here. We want to look more closely at these competencies around issue identification and decision making. I want to be able to sort of tease apart all of those steps between saying this is a problem and yes, this is what we're going to do about it. How are they using secondary and primary information? How are they looking at stakeholder values? How do we best support the development of these competencies in adults and youth in multiple types of systems, both formal and informal? How do we best develop the metacognitive skills to know when to call upon them? So it's great if you have that skill, but if you don't know when to use it, then we're not going to get very far. So really, again, looking at how those knowledge and dispositions and skills are used to make behaviors. And there's a good base on this in the socio-scientific issue research, as well as the environmental behavior bodies. Sadler and Ziedler have done some work on how people reason about socio-scientific issues, patterns of reasoning, what they use, and how can this be integrated into formal education and fostered in informal education. And then the collaborative work. So I'm trying to address some of those issues with a problem-based learning professional development program coming up in January. And here's my question. So does problem-based learning as professional development really increase educators' environmental literacy? And we're going to be looking at it through the demonstrated understanding of the physical, ecological, and socio-political aspects of non-point source water pollution. That's the issue that it's about. Using the construction of multiple solutions within their collaborative group, and then the development of plans of individual and collective actions on a novel environmental issue. So those are the three ways that I'm really going to look at whether problem-based learning is effective in increasing environmental literacy. So the program is called Knowledge and Action on Non-Point Pollution. You gotta have a good acronym. And it's a 7-session hybrid PBL professional development program. So 4 sessions are face-to-face, and 3 sessions are online. And if you're not familiar with problem-based learning, they're given a loosely structured problem, small groups, anywhere, I'm hoping for 5 to 8 individuals in a group. They're given a loosely structured problem and asked to identify their learning issues. What do we need to know and what don't we know? And then they have to identify resources to provide information on that. And then they bring this together and collaboratively they build their knowledge and they come to a solution for the problem. This is the scenario that they'll be provided. Each small group will be provided. Basically, they live in a coastal town, shore town. You can tell I come from New England. A shore town in New Jersey, and within that town is Bay Pond, a coastal lake that has bad water quality, and the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, has identified these 3 issues: sedimentation, eutrophication, and high microbial levels. So as members of this planning committee, and then each person has a role in the community. One is a teacher, one is a chairperson for the Chamber of Commerce, one is a grandmother that's lived there her entire life. They're asked to create a plan to remedy the situation and bring back the beauty of Bay Pond. So why am I choosing problem-based learning? Because it overlaps nicely with the competencies that are needed for environmental literacy. So across the top, I selected just a few of the environmental literacy competencies from Hollweg et al. Sort of the first one from each major step. So describing an issue, asking questions with human, historical, or geographic dimensions, interpreting and using information, identifying relevant factors, so on, to engage in planning based on available resources and sociopolitical contexts, as well as the main components of problem-based learning. And so just in this small table, you can see that each step supports, each of these steps supports different levels of competencies, different types of competencies. So from going from the loosely organized problem and describing the issue, what is the issue here at the core of the problem, all the way down to developing a viable solution that includes available resources and addresses the socio-political contexts. So it's a good match. What kind of assessment will I be using? I'll be assessing individual environmental literacy in 3 ways. Issue knowledge assessment, a short Qualtrics survey that covers a few environmental literacy competencies as well as knowledge about the issue of non-point pollution. Personal meaning maps, which are concept maps that integrate the person's individual beliefs and attitudes towards the issue. And then a think aloud task on a different environmental issue. The collaborative development of environmental literacy, I'll be looking at using session video, looking at how they're working together, how they're coming together and developing these competencies, as well as chat transcripts of the online components. Some examples of items. So competencies include, when I hear about an environmental issue, I consider these factors, right? We're looking at the attitudes and the knowledge that there are multiple components of any environmental issue. There are multiple viewpoints on it. And what are 3 levels of addressing environmental issues? And I use the phrasing individual, civic, so for like non-governmental and group, and governmental that involves regulation. And which of these is a civic remedy? So these are some of the items, and then the knowledge items. What are 2 ways to mitigate and prevent non-point source pollution? The basics of non-point source pollution. The think aloud task, this is the bare bones of it. I'm still working on it. So you get this Facebook message from a friend. Think aloud as you read the article. What other information might you want? What do you think is the best solution? And then they will read an article from the Trenton Times. Mercer County plastic bag fee referendum draws debate from officials and interest groups. It's a surprisingly a well-written article that includes both sides of the issue. So I'm just running short on time. So does anybody have any questions? No? Yes.
I have one question, if that's okay.
Yes. No, you have 2 minutes.
I can do that. For your research question,
Yeah.
is your aim just to basically see some kind of conceptual change or dispositional change in the teachers you're working with? Or is the aim 1 step beyond that?
I
Do you hope to see this in their classrooms?
I haven't gotten to the 1 step beyond yet. So
Okay.
right now, this is a pilot of the program, and I'm hoping to see if it affects the teachers' environmental literacy, and whether this Think Aloud task is a good measure of that environmental literacy. And then the next step beyond that is definitely how does it look in their practice with youth, and does it affect the youth's environmental literacy? So that's my ultimate goal. I'm not there yet.
Can I ask my second?
There you go. See, you went the minimum.
What kind of teachers are these? Are these science teachers, language arts teachers?
I'm targeting social studies, and science teachers for formal, and then informal educators that can be of any scope. It could be positive youth development, 4-H. It could be after-school program at the Y. It could be Liberty Science Center. So
Okay, thanks.
you're welcome. Keith.
Hi, Roberta. That was an interesting talk. I enjoyed it. Throughout the talk, you were presenting various frameworks for assessing the environmental literacy and then making comments such as, this has problems, or this was good in this respect. But I do not recall a slide where you laid out your theoretical framework for what makes a good assessment. So when I was viewing the talk, it came across sort of as ad hoc judgment.
Okay.
Can you maybe elaborate on what you think is a good assessment and how you're evaluating these?
I looked at them. The first was the breadth of the components of environmental literacy that were addressed, because I think that's the big major flaw. And And I do have to say that I do have a bias for mixed methods. So I think that a good assessment for environmental literacy needs to have had that background qualitative work done. There's really been nothing that looks at how the components of environmental literacy work together in order to be a unified construct. Does that make sense? So I think it needs to have had better background grounding itself, and many of these are based simply on the connection of attitudes, beliefs, and behavior. So,
Right,
did I address that?
Yes, you did. I was thinking that there are frameworks for evaluating assessments such as construct validity, base validity, and so on. It might be useful if you evaluated, if you thought about the frameworks that you presented along those dimensions to give the work a little more grounding.
Okay, I will say that the one that I went into, the NELA, the National Environmental Literacy Assessment, has some really, they went in and they have really good face validity and all of that. They did a very thorough proofing of that assessment. So I just think that it's looking at the wrong thing. So, but thank you. Carol?
One thing I wasn't quite clear on is I understand that the belief and attitude stuff is a big piece of a lot of the assessments, and then would scoring be based on how closely those attitudes are related to choices or behavior, or are they on what the attitudes are themselves? Because it seems like, as you mentioned, the issues change and emerge over time, but also the right answer changes over time, right? Or,
Right.
you know, if you take for example, recycling, it's not a simple issue, and so I was just curious about
They're
that.
based, like you said, they're based on how pro-environmental the attitude is. And so they take things like, I participate in the outdoors. They're using these items to represent interest in ecosystems and interest in nature. It's very heavily biased, I think.
So, I mean, it really could be construed as political belief on some level, right?
Right, yeah, yeah. They don't line it up and say, you know, this is left or right, but it's very, I would say it's very pro-environmental focused and not focused on economic issues or that type of thing. So, there's a pretty large body of research on which environmental attitudes, such as caring for animals, valuing and having a connection to your own personal environment, you know, valuing and connecting to the woods that are down the block, to environmental behavior. And actually, one of the things I left out, but in the Israeli study, there was a strong correlation or a strong connection between having an adult in their life that knows a lot about nature and participates in activities in nature to both behavior and attitudes. So I want to look more into that, but it was, but the attitudes.
Less related to whatever curriculum.
Yeah, it's outside factors, outside of school factors,
Okay.
which I think is why it's important to have that informal component. Really be looking. There's not much about how do the other adults outside of school time that are involved in a child's life, how they feel and teach about the environment, how it has an effect. Yeah.
Does any of the background research account for like media and television? Because I remember in the late 80s, early 90s, like every kids show had some type of environmental focus. You know, it was Captain Planet, or you know, Sesame Street, talked about animal, like all those shows had that kind of component, and they often talked about personal, you know, like what do you do to, you know, keep the environment in okay shape, and they also, like Captain Planet would talk about companies and, you know, things that they would do. Does that exist nowadays? And does that impact how people's environmental literacy?
I haven't seen any studies that directly connect media exposure, which would fall into the informal education realm, and environmental literacy. I've seen some studies, very small scale studies, I'm not sure really well constructed studies that connect media exposure to things like Captain Planet and immediate attitudes, nothing that carries long term beyond within the week of viewing.
You mean
So,
they only looked at immediate attitudes? Okay, yeah.
yeah, they
But I
didn't-
feel like those things kind of shape my perspective on environmental issues.
Right. There's more research, not on that type of media, but on social media and environmental attitudes, but there's still not a lot of how it contributes to the overall environmental literacy of the individual. Anything else? Thank you very much.